In this episode, we discuss what it means to sacrifice for one's art and the value of creating. Welcome to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bottom Turtle Podcast. I'm Dr. Shannon Ray, and we're joined by our co-host, visual designer Oyani Onimiya. How you doing, Oyani?
I'm doing okay, Shan. What's up, man? How's your week? I feel like, we haven't spoken since, Thanksgiving? I don't think.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually pretty cool because it's, I remember I was listening to one of the episodes. I think it was No Mentation Without Representation. And it was like, we're recording this the day before Thanksgiving or something like that. Like, oh shit, that was a year ago. It's crazy. We've already been doing this for a year.
Oh yeah, you're right though. It's been a year. I wonder what date we put out the first episode. We have to go back and see, because that will be like the actual anniversary.
I remember that night, man. Yeah, I remember that night. I think we put out the trailer in October, and then the day we put out the first episode, I was driving to therapy for my hand. Okay. So I was, I had physical therapy for my hand, and I remember driving there, and there's that nerve, like you're putting yourself out there, putting this out there. And I remember being like really, really nervous, just, about, is this the correct thing to do? But like Gary Vee said, you just got to throw it out there and just not be afraid of it. And it felt good. It felt good to put that first episode out. Yeah, but my week has been my weeks have been going well. The paper is finally out on the archive. So
yes, congrats on that, man. I was actually thinking about your paper, because you know how on the iPhone, it does these things with your videos, with your pictures and videos or whatever, where it sends you this clip. It's called Memories, I think it's called. I might be getting this wrong, guys. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So the most recent one they sent me, it had a couple of your little diagrams, figures from your paper. And
because I used to send them to you every once in a while. I could just send them to you. Yeah.
I was looking at them and I was thinking to myself, like, man, it will be difficult for you to convince me that, Shannon is not an artist.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this because, of, the graphics or, you painted something nice or whatever, but simply because of the amount of effort and attention and resources, I should say, that you put into configuring the universe in this specific way. It cannot be anything but art.
Yeah.
You going in every day and, putting this elaborate experiment together and getting the data and all that. Like, I imagine it almost like you are floating through the lab and like some classical music is playing and you're just, that's you're creating at that point.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And, that it's interesting to see, because for me as a graphic designer, it's easy to kind of just see art as, graphics and pictures and colors and paint.
Paintings and
but it's
drawings
more
and fashion and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because that, they would say that thing, like a suffering artist, you have to suffer for your art. Mm-hmm. Like producing this paper, which the paper is called Canonical Quantum Coarse Graining and Surfaces of Ignorance. That's the name of the paper. Okay. And I think that I suffered more to create that piece of art than I have any other one, man.
And that's exactly what it is.
That one was tough. That one was tough, man. And that's the thing, is every single paper that I do, like the majority of the work on, like I'm first author and I do all the work on, each one of those takes something out of me, man, because the amount of frustration and the amount of like failure that you have to go through to go from start.
Yep.
Yeah, that you have to confront to start from point A, where you're pretty much starting off with just maybe a few ideas that aren't really solidified, just some rambling ideas.
You have to explore it. Regardless of if it's right or wrong.
Yeah. And you have to find, and you have to like, basically it's like starting off with a giant piece of granite. It's like, okay, what am I going to turn this thing into? Where do I start? Like, what even would be compelling? Like, what would make someone look at this and think, this is something I want to pay attention to. This is something that is worthwhile for me to let it program me to make it, have it make me feel some things, to make it, to put the effort into understanding what it's trying to communicate. And you have to think, okay, how do I mold this granite, this half partially formed idea into something meaningful?
Yeah. And I think I confront this all the time when I have a consultation phone call with, you know, a potential client, and they tell me what the idea is. Oh, I want, one of the more interesting projects I worked on sometime this year was I worked on this project for this guy who wanted to create a family logo.
Yeah. Oh, like a crest, like a family.
Yeah, like a family crest. But he specifically said he didn't want a crest, but he didn't want. So he again gave me this giant piece of granite.
Yeah,
it wasn't disfigured. It wasn't this. It was like, what is this thing? And oh yeah, by the way, here's this piece of granite. Make me a family logo out of it. I'm like, what are you? So, you know, and that's kind of what you're saying is, you know, I get this thing and I have to like chisel away at it. I'm like, okay, does he look like what he wants? Okay, maybe not. Maybe if I do this and I do this, and I came up with 3-4 different iterations of it until he finally, you know, I finally came up with one that he really, really resonated with.
Which is interesting though, because those basically when he comes to you with that request, those are the constraints of the space you have to work in. He's just like, all right, I'm going to give you, these are the constraints. And then given those constraints, you start off with all of the freedom of those constraints. So that's why it's a piece of granite it's a piece of unblemished granite. And that granite, it represents all the possible things that you could create given the constraints of make me a family logo.
And so basically, you know, I had to sit there and, you know, hit my head on the rock. And for me, it's one of those things where you get just even the spark or the smidge of an idea. You have to explore it up to a certain point before you can agree that it's not where you want to be. And so you just chisel away at this ground like, that's not it.
Yeah.
And so it's a process. And I think there is a lot of like happiness and satisfaction that comes at the end of it, or even just from going through that process. Like you have to be comfortable enough to get some satisfaction in that process, because if you're not, you might not be able to continue through it. There has to be some satisfaction in that process for you. And I think that's what makes an artist, being able to find some satisfaction in that process of creating.
Yep. That's exactly it. Yeah. And the thing about that is, you know, working on this last paper, there really were a lot of dead ends like that. Like I was going into a field that's pretty well established, and that is like quantum fidelity. And I was trying to say, okay, what can I say in this space? And the paper ultimately wasn't about quantum fidelity, but you know, that's kind of was the original motivation. And when you first start off, you're looking at like, okay, I think I have some pieces of this puzzle that I can go in and contribute something. And then you go in there and you're like, oh crap, I think I just spent like a few months exploring an idea that is pretty well established. You know, and so you there's a certain point where you think to yourself, have I just wasted a bunch of time?
Do you know what's the funny similarity with that? It happens to me all the time, to where I get a project and I'm working on this design and I go down this rabbit hole for 3, 4, 5 hours, and then it already exists.
Yes.
God damn it.
In academia, man, that shit hurts. You have no idea. So like that stuff can cause you to panic. Like, if you have an idea and you start to explore it, and so there's in the academic process, typically you have the research portion, but then you have the writing it up portion. And so that portion requires doing a literature review where you go through and look at all the literature that has been published on this topic, so you can find out where does my topic fit in this literature. And then you have to construct a story about, oh, well, my project fixes these problems. My project is in the context of this historical equation, you know. But through that process, though, you don't know whether or not someone's already done this. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people do something and go, oh, this shit was solved in like 1850. Like someone figured this out like 150 years ago or something like that. And like that. And so that part is stressful. That part is stressful. And then the part of getting scooped is stressful. Because if you're looking at an idea and like, oh, there's clearly a problem here that people are trying to solve, And so if it's a high profile problem, someone's going to be working on it. And so while you're working on this, like, oh, if I look up on the archive, if someone posted on my topic, oh, I got scooped. That is the worst, man. You do not want to get scooped.
Yeah. I can't even imagine, because that's a whole other game to play. Because I'm wondering, I don't have to confront that kind of a problem to where I'm like, oh, I don't want to get scooped. I just have to create something unique more often than not. Something that doesn't exist before. It might be reconfiguring an old idea into creating something new. But I think overall, the one thing that sticks with me about being a creator is being able to put yourself into something, create that thing, and it just exists, kind of like your paper now. You worked on that paper for months, and it lives now. It literally just has a life of its own. It's just going to be referenced, and people are going to read it and click on the link. It might be what they're looking for, it might not be what they're looking for. People trying to write papers for their school papers, all kinds of, it lives now. It's like a living, breathing thing that you have put into the universe, and it's beautiful. And I think everybody has to be able to do that in their day-to-day life. You have to find a way to create.
Yep, and then not be afraid of what the feedback is, because you're going to get criticized. And that's actually one thing that my friend, not my friend, but my he is my friend as well. But my colleague Paul, like whenever we were doing this, like we were
like, am I his friend? Am I not his friend?
Nah, we're friends, man. He's awesome. But when we were doing this, we were both really happy with how the paper came out, and we're just like, now we got to throw it out there and let it fly. See if it flies. Is this thing gonna crash, or is it gonna fly? And actually, 2 days after we posted it on the archive, I got contacted by couple researchers in that field that wanted to discuss, and so now we're in contact with people, and it's just a really good feeling to put something out there and then have someone go, oh, I find this interesting, I find this worth investigating and looking at. But another thing that I like about art is, even as us being artists, we need other people's art to inspire us to create our own art. And that's one of the most important things, because I was actually thinking about, like I was saying, this process where I felt like I hit a dead end. And then I found the thing that got me through that. It was a small hole, and that small hole was Lie groups and Lie algebras. I was like, let me see if I could go and study this one topic. Let me build this key in myself. Let me build the data, the configuration in my system, so that I can interpret information associated with Lie groups and Lie algebras and see if I can apply it to my research. And that one thing was just like, oh, that little pinhole, there was another universe on the other side of it. Like, thank goodness that I explored this concept.
Yeah, you're like, good. It was a good thing I explored that. You will always thank yourself, that you did.
Yep.
And that's why you can't give up on any smidge of an idea that you have, because you're like, if I don't explore that, it might be the one now. And that's how I just always feel, and just keep pushing myself. You know what? Let me explore that. That might just be the one. Maybe not. Maybe it will.
Yeah. And the thing that made me not give up, the thing that made me like, because every day you wake up, it's like you go to work, you wake up and it's like, okay, yesterday I feel like, I explored this idea, I got nothing. I explored this idea, I got nothing. So like the next day, how's it going to be any different than the last 2 days? And you start giving up. But like you need to be inspired to not give up and just like, let me make some progress. And so, there's this band that I love, man. Like I absolutely love this band. It's called Gaunurius. It's a Japanese power metal band. But that band, man, like you can tell that they're so sincere in what they create. Okay. And I remember like a lot of like, even during this time when I was creating this current paper, a lot of their songs were like really inspiring to me. Like it just lifted my spirits enough to continue trying. And like one of the songs is a song called Burn My Heart. Like that one got me through some tough times in winning the honor. Like I can't be certain that I would have been able to get over that hump without their art.
Yeah, that's interesting though. And for me, once I get stuck like that, I listen to Coldplay. Matter of fact, on my Spotify Wrapped that I was gonna share, Coldplay was like my most played artist. And I know Coldplay gets a lot of shit because it's like, oh, they're a very basic band or whatever. But I have created so much just off of listening to it, so much. I can't even, and this is going back like, I'm talking 8 years now.
Yeah.
So much like, things like schoolwork or deadlines I had to meet or projects I was working on. And I am struggling to be inspired. I'm like, you know what? let me play some Coldplay.
Let me play some Coldplay. See how that programs me.
Yeah, and then, slowly but surely, I'm like, okay. And then I just mellow out and just get into my space. And, everyone has their process. But we got to create, guys, man. We just have to create something.
I remember when I, during that whole, because this was during the pandemic, so we're at home, isolated largely, and not interacting with people as much. And I remember, like, you and I were in constant, interaction. I mean, we always are. And I remember one day I was particularly frustrated, and I was on a walk, and I sent you a message saying something like, I think I said something like, man, like, I see how you do your work. Like, you're just always like persistent at it. Like the way I imagined you in my head, because every time I go visit you, you're like there, you're working, you're thinking, you're working. And it's like, man, Oyani's just grinding, man. I was like, I have to be like Oyani. So I was using my model of you. Yeah, I was using, well, I mean, it seems like you're just grinding to me, but I was using my model of you as like, all right, Oyani doesn't give up. He keeps trying. So I'm going to use the way he creates and how he lives his life to inspire me. And I remember I sent you that message and I was like, man, I'm trying to be like you. And yeah, so that was, that was inspiring as well.
I just know that, there's this documentary on Netflix, that I like to watch. It's called Abstract. The first episode is about this illustrator in Germany. His name is Christoph Niemann. I have some of his books. And something he said in that documentary has always stuck with me. He said, there's a point you get to as a creative, especially when you do it for a living. You have to just show up to work. Because you can't sit at home and wait for inspiration to hit.
Yeah.
You have to sit there and just find your inspiration and just create. And so when I start to get like, man, I can't get this, it's not coming out high, I just know, you know what? You sit there, keep looking for inspiration, keep creating, because the moment you start to slide into that spiral of, am I good enough? Can I do this? It's hard to come out of that, man.
Yeah.
It's hard to come out. And another thing is, I know it's easy to, romanticize being an artist or creating things, especially in the world we live in now where, we still have to pay bills, we still have to do these things. And some people find themselves working at jobs that, maybe you're not creating anything, maybe you are just going in and, punching the clock, waiting for the phone to ring, customer service, whatever it is. There are people who work in Excel and they're able to create art inside of it. They come up with unique ways to solve problems. They come up with unique strategies to like change different things, or they're so invested in what they do as a job, it becomes their art. I can imagine someone who is, imagine two people who work at a restaurant. One of them is a chef. He loves cooking. Yep. He lives to cook. That's all he wants to do. The other guy is also a chef, but he's there because, he has no other choice. That's just a way for him to pay his bills.
Yeah.
They're both doing the same work. One of them is probably creating art while the other one is just going through it. And there's thousands of people in the world who have to deal with that reality. The reality of, I have to just go to this job. And it's easy for you and I to talk about creating. But here's the thing, though. Even if you're not creating at your job, you have to find a way to create outside of it. It doesn't have to be for money. It doesn't have to be what you do full time. But I can tell you, like, from my own personal experience, your happiness goes up as you create things and put them into the universe and just give life to these things. Like, you find yourself having more meaning as to what the hell you're doing.
Well, I think the reason why that is because, we were saying in the configuration stability principle episode that we have at the base level, we have to play the first fundamental game, and that is existing. We must exist first. But what happens when you've conquered that game? Like, what if to the point where you don't have to expend a significant or majority of your computational resource just trying to survive? It's like, okay, I've won that game, so what do I do next? And I think the next game is to create. Like, the whole point is that if we are information processors, then all we're doing is taking in data interpreting the data, and then outputting an interpretation, then using that to bring another configuration to existence. And then we bring these configurations into existence, our art, and then we make acts to stabilize that art. And so to an information processor, creating is everything. Like, what else do you do besides create information and make it stable? And so if you are living a life that is completely void of a creative process, it's almost like you're missing the purpose to exist. Like you're missing one of the major pillars of what it means to live a meaningful life.
And I think that's the key thing I was going for is, at the end of the day, that's the one thing I think we all share in common is we should all be trying to create something. Some people's art is simply how they take care of their family.
Yes,
how they set up the schedule, how they, set up the appointments, the holiday schedule, the vacation planning. That's art to some people. And when you meet those people, you can always tell what is someone's art. It's obvious.
Yep. Like I look at my parents sometimes, and my dad, he actually has quite a few hobbies. Like he builds, he does construction work. Like he designs decks. He builds a lot of stuff. But when we were younger, like looking at it, my mom and dad were like, their art, like they were able to create a reality in which they were sufficient to be able to take care of 7 humans plus like a dog and a cat and a bird. And they were able to create that and make it stable. To me, that's just like, and they were young too. Like they got married when they were 19. So it's just like, that is impressive.
It's
like
impressive.
I feel like that in and of itself, to be able to create a reality that stable,
keep it stable.
to raise your kids is an insanely impressive piece of art, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we're saying. It's not the idea that we all have to make some sculpture or paint something or be like a world-renowned chef or whatever, but you can't live a life that's completely devoid of creation, of creating things, of art in itself. Like you have to be striving to do that. And your job might take up most of your time and all that, but I'm really grateful for the last 2+ years that I've been able to make a living off of creating stuff.
Yeah.
To me, I don't think there's any more enjoyment that I could possibly get out of life beyond just being able to create things for a living.
Yeah,
because they're
and I'm real proud of you too for making that leap. Because I remember back before, like I think it was when right before we went on that cruise, and you were talking about how like you that job that you had before, like you were just not feeling like fulfilled, and it's like, man, buying stuff doesn't do it. Like I need to do something. I was thinking, man, you have so much freedom. Like you have, like compared to the average person, you have a lot of freedom. Like you should just create something. Like, and that's the thing. It's like having hobbies. Like I think people need to have hobbies, because hobbies, whether you're creating art that is sustaining your life like financially, or if it's just like your hobbies, though you're always paying a computational cost to create. And so that is a sacrifice. So you're making a sacrifice to bring something into existence, to conceptualize it, and then rearrange the physical reality to bring an interpretation of that conceptualization into existence. And when you're doing that, you have to expend energy. You have to lift things. You have to think. Like the process of conceptualizing that's resource like that. And it hurts because sometimes you get frustrated, and sometimes things aren't working out the way you want. Sometimes you have a plan to go from A to B, but then this other obstruction happens and you have to find a way around it. All of that stuff is the creative process. And every time you go through that, you are paying your costs. So at the end of the day, when you actually created your art is your trophy of what you've done. So you can look at this trophy like, this is what I created. Yeah. And that's where the meaning comes from. And if you find yourself getting meaning out of things that required little to no computational cost, then that's probably a false trophy. This is how you identify false trophies. It's probably a false trophy, and you're paying the cost somewhere else. You're always paying the cost, because if you're going online and you've basically joined a tribe where it's like, oh, I'm left or I'm right or I'm pro-Trump or I'm woke, whatever tribe you've joined, if all you did was sign up, like, I'm in this tribe, and then I repeat these things, and then you're getting all this meaning out of it, it's like, you paid no cost to get these feelings that you're paying. You're getting these feelings, but you didn't pay for them. So what are you paying? Like, how are you paying for them? And it's most likely through delusion. Your version of reality is not consistent with reality, and it's like, are you paying for this and your ability to keep things stable around you?
And I think it's important to realize the value of what you just said, like the idea that you only have so much resources.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is not even you as an individual. I'm talking about the entirety of us as a species. The resource that we have is not infinite, so we have to decide where we're going to spend it. It's almost like,
exactly.
It's like, you have money in your bank account. Yeah, it's not just, it's not infinity. You don't open your bank account and see the infinity sign in there. I mean, maybe if you're Jeff Bezos, I guess, I don't know. But I've never gone but it's a specific number that's in there. And just imagine that is the exact same thing as the resource that we're talking about. And you have to constantly spend this resource as you go through life, as you decide what's in. So you have to be able to decide, am I applying my resources in the right way, and what am I getting out of it at the end of the day?
And what am I getting out of it? Like, I'm paying for this, and what am I getting out of it? And I think one way to put this in perspective is we can go back to the degree of freedom soup. And so remember that the degree of freedom soup is an attempt to conceptualize what the universe is without filtering it through a mind. Yeah. So it is to say that the universe can be in a configuration. It can be in some state, and then it evolves from one state to another state. And so you have to try to imagine all of the traits and properties the universe could have. Those are the degrees of freedom. And then you have to imagine what settings they are. And so when you're thinking about that, when you're thinking about the universe evolving from one state to the other, then all of the possibilities, like, the universe could be evolving from you being happy to you being sad. It can evolve to you being in jail or you not being in jail. These are like high level conceptualization of the universe going from one state to another. But then if you start breaking it down into the way we do it in physics, you're talking about like the momentum, you're talking about the positions, you're talking about the angular momentum. Like, that is another way of conceptualizing the universe's state. And so you have to try to imagine all of the ways to conceptualize the universe's state, and then you have to try to conceptualize, given all the ways you can conceptualize the state of the universe, then you have to look at how can I influence it from the state it's in to the next state. And when you're trying to think of how you can influence it to go from one state to the next, you have to realize that you can't conceptualize everything. So you can't conceptualize everything, so there's a computational cost to what you choose to conceptualize. Yes. And then you don't have infinite resources that if you've conceptualized it to actually move a mountain, essentially what you're doing when you're rearranging things, like moving a mountain. So then you don't have infinite resources to just move mountains. And so from that, you can get a scope of all the states and all the things the universe can be in. How much can I influence it? And then that is your computational resource. That's your computational capacity. How much can I influence the universe from one state to the next?
How much resources and how do I allocate resources to create this influence anyway?
Yes, exactly. What do I choose? What do I choose to expend my computational modeling? So your conceptualization is your modeling. What do you choose to model? And how much effort do you put in to make sure that your model has high fidelity so that it's actually consistent with the thing you're conceptualizing? Yep. Like, these are all the costs that you're paying for in your mind when the universe is evolving from one state to the other. And if you find yourself not expending resources and you're just
getting
on cruise control,
and you're just getting trophies without expending resources. You have to
without expending resources,
reevaluate those trophies. I think that's
what are they?
Exactly. Because if you find that you are giving yourself these trophies, you imagine if you lay down in bed at the end of the day and you've done nothing all day. And that was a good day. And then you hand yourself a gold star. Good job. It's like, you didn't expend no resources whatsoever to earn that star that you just gave yourself. And I think that that's where you start to really question, okay, I'm giving myself this trophy based off of something I read online or something I reposted. And, I repost this picture and I get like 500 likes. I'm like,
it's like, you hit share.
How much resources did you expend though?
Yep.
Because that correlates with the value of that trophy. Trust me. It really does. Yeah.
Yep. And that's the thing is, you know, it's like, you know, one of my favorite pieces of art is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I think that show is absolutely brilliant, and I think it has a very clear thesis. And the thesis is, one, they harp on equivalent exchange.
Yeah.
You don't get anything for free.
For free.
You know,
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, what is the cost to get the thing that I'm trying to get? Like, there's always an equivalent cost. And then the second part of the thesis is you can't go around thinking that you're more important than everything else. And essentially, the main villain of that show, his biggest problem is that he had a god complex. Yeah. And he thought that, you know, it's like another thing they emphasize that's central to the story is you are one small part of a larger whole. You can never mistake yourself for the whole. You know what I mean? And so I think that's basically the thesis of the entire show. And so I think this idea of paying a cost is a fundamental concept. And I think that piece of art, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, communicated that effectively. And so you always have to be asking yourself, like, if I'm posting something and it got 1,000 likes and it's basically just some self-righteous whatever, and I'm getting all this meaning and values and I'm feeling so important from it, it's like, yeah, but it's like you should be suspicious of something that gives you that much meaning when all you did is hit share.
You should be suspicious. That's the word. You should be
suspicious.
You should be suspicious about it because you should really be taking a good look at yourself like, I'm getting way too much meaning and value from this thing that I did not expend too much resources to have. Like I can imagine if you spent like a week doing research on police brutality, for example, and you did all that research, came up with an argument, and then you posted this on social media and you get like 1,000 likes off of it. That's one person. I go around, I see them, screenshot it, post it on my page. Okay, it's both the same thing though, but one person earned that trophy. One person did not.
Yeah.
It's really that simple. It's really that simple.
Yep. Yeah. You don't want to be giving yourself false trophies, man. That's just
you don't.
It's just something that I always try to emphasize is that your art. Anyway.
And so you have to be, creating. You have to be putting your ideas out there into the world. And one thing that I'm excited about as the internet and computers is evolving is we're starting to see the value of the conceptual space.
Yes.
We're starting to just live in there now. And I'm like, we've been saying this for so long, guys, but because now we're going into the next level of abstraction, I should say, to where we're deciding what is meaning, what has meaning, what has value, what doesn't have value. And all of this is just these games, we are playing these high level games in the conceptual space. And it's imperative that we all become more aware of how much we're going to have to live there as we go forward and how to navigate it.
And I think that it also comes down to, it's like, well, what archetypical spirits am I trying to embody? Which spirits am I worshiping? And, this whole idea of being an artist is the idea of how we define it is the idea of conceptualizing something and then bringing that conceptualization into existence, and that's your art. And as we were saying before in the archetypes and internal spirits, each archetypal spirit creates differently. Okay. Archetypal. Yeah, I looked it up afterwards. I realized that that archetypical was not correct, but it's archetypal, which I think sounds worse. But it's archetypal spirit. Each one of them create differently. And so as we were saying, if you embody the spirit of a chef, that creates differently than, say, the spirit of a physicist. Comedian. I don't know. Yeah, physicist. Yeah. And so when you're going through, you're basically making a bargain with these spirits. You're coming up to those spirits, and the spirit says, do you want to create in accordance with my will? Yes, I want to create in accordance with your will. All right, then here are the rules that you must follow so that you can create as a scientist. It's like, okay, what do I have to do? All right, you have to obey the scientific method. You must study for hours on end. You must go into a lab and you must do these experiments. You must verify your data. You must construct logically sound arguments. These are the constraints of a scientist. And so, every single time those spirits, there's those archetypal spirits, they're basically when you're making this bargain with them, they're telling you what the cost is to embody their spirit. And so if you find that certain archetypal spirits saying all you have to do to create like me is pledge fealty, I am a this, and that's it. And then you get all of these trophies. And you're like, wait a minute, that's all I had to do? Yeah. That's how you can start seeing, like, is this like what? You know, is this really false? Valuable? Is this a false? It's like, is
there really truth in this?
Is it truth, and is this thing a deceiver? Is it a deceiver? Like, this cost does not seem to equate to what you're trying to give me. I am suspicious of what you're offering me. You might be a deceiver.
Yes, suspicious. Yes, you have to be suspicious. That's the word. You have to be suspicious of it. Every time you get a trophy without having to pay too much of a resource that got you that trophy, you have to be suspicious. And you have to look at it. It doesn't mean there's a boogeyman trying to get you. You could be suspicious of yourself, suspicious of your mind, or where you are mentally. Like, why does this trophy mean so much to me, despite the fact that I know I didn't really put up too much resources to get it?
Is what this spirit offered me? Is it offering me a delusion? Yeah. Is it offering me a delusion and then giving me false trophies? And is that what this thing is? You see it all the time when you're watching UFC or something, like someone going up there and then like Rose Namajunas knocking out Zhang Wei Li, and she's just crying and she's full of all this emotion. That I can't believe I'm feeling this feeling of becoming a champion again. And it's like, she doesn't have to go and be... she was amazing. The first fight and the second fight was great. But, you know, when she has that trophy, that UFC belt sitting in her gym or her house or something like that, she knows all of the time she spent in the gym. Yep. She knows all of the things she didn't eat. She knows all the things. She knows all the sacrifices she made to get that thing. So she doesn't have to be suspicious of it. I know what the cost is to feel. If I want to become a UFC champion, this is the cost. Yeah. This is how much it costs.
And I think we live in a world now where, you know, and this is something that's probably been coming up for years now. There's always been this talk about participation trophies. Mm-hmm. And for the longest time, I didn't quite see a problem with it.
Yeah.
You know, but, you know, as time goes on, I can kind of see why getting used to this idea of a trophy just because is detrimental.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is. You should always feel like you earned it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, you know, of rhetoric that's going around online now where people say things like, you know, I don't want to struggle, you know, I don't want to, what's that other thing? I don't want to be resilient or whatever. Like all of those things, it gives value to the trophy you get. How can you not see this? No one is trying to punish you or deprive you of living a good life. But, you know, if you want a trophy that means anything, you have to put in the effort for it. You have to pay the resource for it.
You're probably going to do some suffering. Yeah. That's it. You're going to do some suffering. Yeah. And I think that's what it comes down to. The cost is related to the suffering, which is related to the sacrifice. And that's why you can interpret all of reality in terms of, okay, what do I want? Okay, I want this configuration of reality to come into existence.
AKA, what's the cost? Let's break this down. AKA, I want a 4-bedroom house. Go on.
Yes. Okay. So, or I want to have all the I want to have a bunch of beautiful women, you know, on my shoulder or whatever the thing that you want. You know, there's a cost that comes with it.
There's a cost that comes with it, and you have to examine that cost and ask yourself, am I willing to pay it to get this trophy? Does this trophy mean that, like, for someone like me, being the guy who has 4 private jets and 8 houses, it's not something I want. I'm not willing to pay the cost for that. I'm just not. I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yeah. It's not worth it. But that's the thing, though, is you can look at it from everything. So again, like we were saying before, it all has to do with causal structure. Mm-hmm. So the paying of the cost, the making the sacrifice, this is another one of these bottom turtles where it costs all the way down. You know, before we could say something like, all right, well, I have some values, and then I'm going to decide whether or not to indulge in this signal or not. And so I have to judge whether or not it's consistent with my values. And so you're judging all the way down, but then it's always a question of values all the way down, but it's also a question of cost all the way down, because again, the things you want to bring into existence are consistent with your values, which are consistent with which games you want to play.
Yep.
And so then for every game you want, so for what games you want to play, you then have to ask what the costs are to actually compete in this game. And so it's cost all the way down. Like whenever you break things down in terms of causal structure, what is the state of the universe, and then what state of the universe do I want to come into existence, because you're an information processor. When you break things down this way, you can see the overlap between all of the ways of conceptualizing reality, because it always comes back down to information processing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's just obvious to me how we inherently know, like, most people who listen to this podcast will probably know exactly what we mean by trophy and what we mean by cost. Like, we know it. We see those people who make it to the Olympics. We know they didn't just get there because, they were just hanging out at home like, oh man, I guess I'll sign up for the Olympics this year. That's not how none of this works. We know exactly. When we see those people, we give them all the respect in the world, because we know, man, these people put in so much work to get here. Like, that's why we do that. You see someone walking around with an Olympic medal on their neck, you're not going to be like, yeah, well, I got a necklace too. No.
Yep.
You know what that meant. You know how you got it.
And that's the thing is if a society stops valuing the things that have high cost, the things that are very unlikely for the universe to come into existence without
configurations that don't come often.
The configurations don't come often. The ones that require a lot of sacrifice and cost. If we start flattening what we value to say, oh, participation trophies are just as valuable as someone going out and competing to be the best fighter in the world, and that these two things are equivalent, you start flattening the values. That's how you know a society is crumbling. Yeah. That is the sign of a dying society, because it's going to be the case that not understanding the value of sacrifice and what it means to actually suffer for your art is going to breed a complacency. It's going to breed subpar art.
Yep.
It's just going to. And then it's like, okay, now I'm competing with maybe some other nation or some other group, and they're valuing art that requires a lot of effort and sacrifice, and we're valuing subpar art. They're going to outcompete us.
And I think you could apply this to anything from business to like the military to anything. We need to be able to, healthcare, medicine, we need to be able to determine who gets what trophies. And we need to have that level. I think we discussed this a few episodes back, where we have to be able to respect, like, a doctor who spends XYZ number of years going through medical school.
You did say that.
You don't try to equate your 10 minutes of Googling. I don't even care if you spent 24 hours of Googling. It's never going to equate 10 years of school and 15 years of practice. It's not going to equate a Nobel Prize, for example.
Yeah,
it's not so. We need to be able to decide those trophies, and the Olympics is a perfect example. One of the things that pissed me off about this most recent Olympics was the idea that a lot of the conversation was around athletes that were popular, not for the thing they went there for. So a couple of
Are we getting into dicey territory here?
I think we are, but I'm trying to keep it as
Go
PG
for it,
as
man.
possible. But my whole point is to say, I want to give like a real life example of the trophy thing we're talking about, to where these people spend, these gymnasts, U.S. gymnasts, I'll talk about the American gymnasts specifically. They probably spent all of this time watching their diets, doing their flips, trying to learn and whatnot. They get to the Olympics, and we don't hear too much about the people who actually did the flipping around that they were there for. But we hear more about people who are in some controversy or the other. And that's kind of what you say about a society that we stop paying attention to what trophies to give who. We're sliding into decay at that point.
Yeah.
Because a lot of two of the most popular athletes who got a lot of TV and radio time during the Olympics, they performed very poorly or did not even participate. And to this day, we don't know who won the gold medal. We don't even know the names of these people.
It sucks.
Because it's like, man, I put in all the effort to creating this art and I put it out there. You know, I won the gold medal for it, but it's like, okay, cool, good for you. But we're talking about this over here.
This controversy, yeah. And that's the thing is I think the, you know, if people, so I have two things about that. One, I agree with what you're saying that the value, like what we choose to look at, that's a computational resource because, you know, what we choose to pay attention to, that we pay for that. Yes. We pay for what we choose to look at. And if it's like coming down to like looking at drama, like, you know, whenever two people are fighting and yelling at each other, there is a primal part of our being that just finds that interesting without much effort. It's like, it's as primal as sexual stimulation. You know what I mean? Like, it does not take much effort for, it's one reason why sex and violence sells and controversy sells. Like, there's a reason why these things sell.
Those things are
it's
like
because
default.
They're default. They hit nerves. They're basically like the automatic responses. And so if you're acting more consciously, then you can fight back the signals from those automatic responses. And so when you see a society that is indulging and spending more of their resources looking at this stuff that is just automatic, as opposed to the things that require you to eat those feelings and then post-process the data, like, okay, is this what I should be paying attention to? And is there something of more value to pay attention to? And if everyone is choosing to pay attention to the controversies and the things like that, as opposed to people performing things of excellence, then that is going to show where people are putting their computational resources, which is showing what the society as a whole is valuing, which is giving a meter as to like, okay, is this society going to be stable? Yeah. Because if the Olympics tomorrow, and this is the second thing I was going to say, if the Olympics tomorrow just started letting anybody in, no matter how much they tried or whatever, and then an Olympic gold medal was just given out to anyone pretty much, and it didn't, like, if that happens, and we're all pretending as though that trophy is as good as a trophy from 30 years ago or something like that, then that's when we've fallen into delusion land. That's delusion land where we're saying that this thing that required little to no computational effort is as valuable as the thing that we know required a third amount of computational effort. We cannot equate these two things.
No, we cannot. And I think just being able to realize where we're spending our resources and what we're getting out of it is probably the first step into, you know, navigating this conceptual space that we're going to be stuck in this space so much more. Everybody's talking about the metaverse now, Web 3.0, NFTs. We're treating in idea land. We're just living in the conceptual space, and we all have to be comfortable with it. Because if you're not, man, you will fall off a cliff.
And the funny thing is, too, that we've always been living in the conceptual space. I mean, just think about money, for example. Like, that's the thing that always frustrates me when people are like, oh, it's all just a construct. As if that somehow trivializes it. Like, okay, let me put it this way. Eunice and I was watching something the other day, and it was about a trial. And not any of the high-profile trials. I think we're watching a TV show. And in that, so if you're someone who is on trial, you want to convince as many people as possible that your reality is the correct reality. And that reality that you probably want is the one in which people agree that you shouldn't be in jail. So all it requires is a group of people to agree that you deserve to be in jail for you now to have to live in jail and not have any freedom. Yeah. And so it's like, okay, yeah, whether or not people believe you should be in jail is just a construct. It just exists in the conceptual space. But the effects of that on your actual lived experience is no joke. Like, it's just like our laws matter. What we choose to say is the law. That's all just conceptual agreements. We all agree this is the law. And so but that affects how the universe evolves. It affects what experiences we have. It expects, you know, it changes so much of our experience and what and how we live. This is why we associate these things like spirit. Like, what is the spirit of the law? What does this law create? Because everything creates something. The constraints, the spirits, they create something. They make the universe evolve one way versus some other way. And this is a way of categorizing things. In terms of spirits, it's a powerful way of categorizing things. How does it create? What's its art?
And once we spent too much time, like we talked about in the last episode, once we spent too much time just ripping out these constraints and pretending like everything is all the same and we start to value everything equally and just pretend like this one thing means the same thing as the other thing. we're just going to stray into chaos.
Chaos land. No, that's chaos land. Yeah, that's
land. And yeah, but I think we can probably wrap up the episode here.
Yeah, I think so.
But the one thing I wanted to leave everyone with is you have to try to create in your day-to-day life. It doesn't have to be the most beautiful art ever. It doesn't have to be the most Instagrammable, the most likable, retweetable piece of art. You know, it could be your day-to-day job. It could be your 9 to 5. It could be anything you're doing. But at the end of the day, being able to create something, expand the resources to put it out there into the world is a very, very satisfying feeling. And I dare say it is probably the one thing we can agree on that is the reason why we're all here.
Yeah. And there's another thing that everyone has the power to inspire everyone else. And one thing about art is it's meant to communicate. And another thing that's interesting about art is that we all have the human configuration. So we're all humans, which means that we all have the base spirits that exist in our system, like anger and fear, jealousy and love. And like, we all have those in us. And so we know what it's like if someone comes up to someone and slaps someone for no reason, or someone comes up and starts berating them, or someone goes up and gossips about someone. We know how it would feel if someone spread lies about our spirit and who we were, because what that does is it changes how people interact with us, which changes which experiences you have. It's damaging someone's spiritual body is when you like lie about them and spread and gossip. And so, what was I saying? And so you have to understand your capacity to affect the state of reality, your capacity to inspire people. What do you create? What is your art? And you have to really think about, what art am I creating? And you have to be honest about it. Because if you're not honest, then there's a good chance you're creating art you're not intending to create. And if that's spreading more negativity, then you're destabilizing your surroundings, which then spreads negativity to the people around you, which then destabilizes their reality. If that destabilization spreads, we're all screwed. And you have to know that, and like, just like we were saying before, like on Instagram, you go on there and you see people who are just completely in tune with their body and system. They're doing these crazy flips. They are doing these crazy pieces of art. You can tell how much they sacrifice, and they're just showing you, look what the human spirit can create, and then you use their creation to inspire you, because that's what art does.
Yeah, and even for me specifically, it's been such a useful tool in inspiring me, because my entire Instagram feed, that's all I see. I just see people creating different arts, different, designs or web designs, traditional art. That's all I'm feeding my brain, and I'm just inspired by it day to day, because it reminds me of what the human spirit is capable of. What we can conceptualize and just bring into reality. A perfect example would be if you follow the, I think it's the New York Times, or is it the New Yorker? They have these little cartoons that they post. And those artists who draw those cartoons on there, they might not draw the most anatomically correct figures or whatever, but it's so interesting how they can take a concept from the conceptual space and create something else with it. And I'm always blown away by how simple the ideas might be. How obvious the idea might be. And I'm like, man, why didn't I ever think about it that way?
Yeah. Why didn't I think about it that way? Yep.
You just watch that and you just get inspired by that.
And that's actually one thing I like. That is the feedback that I like the most about the podcast. Is most of the time, almost every person, whenever if they like the podcast, they say, I didn't think of it that way. Yeah. Because the stuff we're saying it's not new. Everyone, basically, when people hear this, everyone knows most of this stuff. It's just common sense, but it's just what lens do you use to look at it? Yeah. And that lens affects your perception of reality, which affects how you interpret things, which affects how you create, which affects how the universe evolves, which affects your spirit. Like, you see how this works? Like, your perception affects reality. You have to be able to nurture it and know, okay, what data am I feeding myself? It's like people say this cliche thing that it's like when you're going online, people are eating like what is like the equivalent of intellectual cheeseburgers. You're eating intellectual fast food when you're just going on, looking at something that someone posted that's usually designed to hit that rage center or that self-righteousness center, and you're just eating that. And every time you eat that, it shifts your location in the space of configurations, and you have to be aware of who you're allowing to create your reality for you, who you're allowing to create your perception.
Because you need to be the creator of all of that, or at the very least be aware of who you're giving that power to.
Yes, that's a good point. Or at least be aware of who you're giving that power to.
At the very least, you're either creating it yourself or being aware of who you're giving that power to. But like always, guys, if you agree or disagree, let us know. You can hit us up on the socials. We are on, I like how I say the socials. Is that the socials or whatever? But
do it, man. Do whatever you feel. Whatever you think has to come
we're on Instagram and Facebook, The Bottom Total Podcast, and also on Reddit. I think on Reddit we are at The Bottom Total. And send us your questions. Leave us a review in app. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Apple Music, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcast.
Pretty much everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yep.
I think everywhere. But,
all right. So
stay turtling, guys. We'll catch you guys next time.
Peace.